Good afternoon. Apologies for the delay in the press con. I am Cookie Diokno. I'm the Secretary General of the Free Legal Assistance Group. I also head the um, Flag Anti-Death Penalty Task Force. This forum is organized by the Flag Anti-Death Penalty Task Force. I was hoping a couple of my colleagues would be able to join me. We are 9 organizations. We have Flag, of course, and then we have from the church, we have the Episcopal Commission on Prison Pastoral Care of the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines. We have the Philippine Jesuit Prison Service Foundation. We have the Samahan ng mga pamilya ng mga nasa death row. And then we have DNA Analysis Laboratory of the Natural Sciences Research Institute of the University of the Philippines. And Carl, this is your seat. I'm not Carl. And okay, so that's 5, 6. No Box Transitions Foundation, Inc., Developmental Legal Advocacy Clinic of the College of Law of the De La Salle University, and finally the Commission on Human Rights. We're very happy that you joined us, and we would like to take this opportunity to say a little bit about the forum, to introduce our guests, and I understand you have been asking for our reactions to the statement issued by the palace this morning. Am I right? Okay. May I introduce... Ikaw na? Chel, ikaw na. May I introduce my brother, our chairman of FLAG, Dean of the College of Law. I think you all know him, Attorney Jose Manuel Chel Diokno.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming not just to this press conference, but to the activity we have today and tomorrow. We feel that it's very important that we discuss and engage in a conversation about the drug problem in a way that is both rational and evidence-based. And that's really the purpose why we have organized this forum and invited not just the media, but a cross-section of our society to participate. We hope this is the beginning of a conversation that will be ongoing, and we hope that this kind of conversation will replace the conversation that is being done on the streets with the use of firearms. Having said that, I'm sure you are aware of our position. I'm speaking for the Free Legal Assistance Group on the extrajudicial killings. May I just say something about that for a minute or two? While we are deeply disturbed by the loss of life that the war on drugs is causing, we are equally disturbed with the impact of the war on drugs on our justice system. Every day that people are encouraged to take the law into their own hands, lives are lost, but more even deeper than that, our legal system loses all its meaning. And I am particularly disturbed because of this administration's ongoing program, because I feel that the day will come, if we do not stop, that the only way we will be able to maintain order in this country will be through a more authoritarian form of government. Okay?
Just take a quick opportunity to introduce my other colleagues, Rudy Diamante from the ECPPC, CBCP, and from CADP, Coalition Against the Death Penalty, also a member of the task force. And then you have Dolly Pangilinan, who is the head of the Samahan ng mga Pamilya ng mga nasa death row. In response to, before I introduce our foreign guests, just want to finish the story of the UN Special Rapporteur. I understand that you have been asking us to give a comment or a statement on reaction to the statement issued by the Malacanang. 3 things. First, I understand that the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Geneva will issue its own statement. Two, as far as we all know, the UN Special Rapporteur followed all of the protocols and all of the procedures required, which means informing the Philippine government, contrary to what is listed on the statement. The third thing is, we organize this forum. We want to engage in dialogue, meaningful dialogue. We want to be able to change drug policy. We think there are alternatives to what is happening outside. And that's one of the reasons why we are holding this particular forum. Now, for us, frankly, to see a statement like that, a reaction like that from the palace, it seems to us the palace is not willing to engage. The palace is actually the one who is blocking all efforts to have a meaningful discussion on the kind of drug policy this country actually needs. And that is our official statement on the statement. On that point, may I introduce our colleagues, our experts, okay? Dr. Carl Hart, he is from the Columbia University. Okay, here I go. He is a neuropharmacologist. And he has written a book, and his expertise is on the public health approach to drugs, something. It's okay, whatever. He's very nice to me. Okay, and he's written a book which is also being used as the main, shall we say, textbook on this. Then we have Dr. Collins. Dr. John Collins is with Ideals of the London School of Economics. His expertise is on the economics of the war on drugs supply side. Yes, got it. Okay, and then we have Mr. Pascal Tanguay. He is a Canadian who has been based in Thailand for the past 15 years, and he is here to share with us how Thailand's war on drugs went. He also acts as a consultant of the Princess of Thailand.
Princess Bajrakatiyaba.
Okay, on harm reduction, right? On drug policy in Thailand. So, would you like to hear a little bit from them? Okay. I'll start with you. Always you.
Thank you for coming. I will be speaking in about, I guess, 45 minutes or so, or maybe half an hour. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be engaged in this conversation. I'm happy you are here. I'm here mainly to help you all understand what real evidence-based public health approach looks like. We oftentimes hear the term evidence-based, but evidence-based is used by people, that term is used by people who don't even know what evidence is. And so if you come to my talk, we'll actually learn what evidence means. And hopefully that evidence will take a more humane approach. That's why I'm here. Dr. Collins.
Okay, so I think there's a lot of discussions around the human rights implications of what's happening in the Philippines. And I think why I'm here and some of the evidence and expertise that I hope to bring is that it's not just around the human rights implications. There is a discussion to be had about what works. We have decades of evidence from other places around the world that have tried similar things or else tried different things when it comes to drug policy. And we need to look at what's happening in the Philippines today, I think, in those terms. This is not a new idea. Declaring a war on drugs or drug users has been tried in other jurisdictions. Pretty uniformly, it has failed in other jurisdictions and has often produced far, far more harm than good. And so that's what I'd hope to bring out in my discussion today, is not just about the demand side or even necessarily the human rights implications, because we have terrific experts here on those points, but actually why the supply side aspects, why this tough militarized police approach won't produce the results that are necessarily expected. So that's what I'll be speaking on.
Thank you, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank FLAG and No Box for inviting me to contribute to this forum. I think it's a very great opportunity to share, as Dr. Collins was just saying, some of the experiences from a neighbor in your region in ASEAN that has tried exactly what is being implemented in the Philippines for the past couple of months. The results from Thailand have been very well documented, studied, evaluated, and I'll be presenting tomorrow a lot of the evidence of the impact that the war on drugs has had in Thailand. And most of it, as Dr. Collins was pointing out, most of the evidence points to how the war on drugs has neither achieved its objectives and has caused a lot of harm to both people who use drugs as well as their communities. So the war on drug doesn't impact, the impact of the war on drug never stops with the drug users or with the pushers. It has ramifications that go far beyond the individuals that are targeted by the war on drugs. And I'm hoping that tomorrow, by sharing this evidence, you can leapfrog 15 years and catch up to where Thailand is today, where they've said last year, the Ministry of Justice last year, confirmed that Thailand had lost the war on drugs and that they were looking for alternatives, for evidence-based alternatives to manage drug-related issues in their country. So again, I hope that some of the evidence can help leapfrog those 15 years and skip all that damage to go directly to where we can generate some positive results for Filipino citizens. Thank you.
And now, if you have any questions, we're quite willing to answer your questions. If you have no questions, you can ask later. Yes, sir.
Do you have any specific suggestions, alternatives to the war on drugs that you can suggest to the Philippine government that they undertake, given the policy proposal that was presented this morning by the chair of the Dangerous Drugs Board? Is that enough for you, or do you have alternatives?
You guys can. Well, you asked, do we have any suggestions? So I've been asked to give a presentation, and that's going to take about 30 minutes to 45 minutes, and it's going to require some background. So that's a really good question. So I don't know if this is the place to answer it completely, but it's important for us to know here. Whenever we hear people saying that we're having a war on drugs, reinterpret that phrase to say it's a war on people you care about. That's what it essentially is, because if there's no such thing as a war on drugs. You're never going to rid any society of all drugs. It's just impossible. And the problems are always never drugs. The drugs function as a distraction for some other reason. And this isn't complicated. All you need to do is to look at who's being arrested, who's being killed. And what you will find is that it's the undesired people in your society, the poor people in your society. And so it, in effect, becomes a war on those undesired people. So let's be honest about that sort of thing.
If I may on that point, is that what you need to look, and I think this follows what Dr. Hart was saying, is what was the necessity for the recent declaration of the war on drugs? So there's a perception that this is at a crisis point and there has to be action and there has to be severe action. Now I can tell you, based on the data, the Philippines is probably below average in terms of consumption rates on the international scale. So it is not at the same kind of crisis levels that other countries who perceive to have a problem are at. And so there is an element where this does feel like a slightly manufactured crisis. A lot of the issues that the Philippines are perceived to face when I speak to people in, say, the United States or other places who are experts on security and the transnational aspects of drugs, is that the Philippines is seen as a transshipment point. And that's where a lot of the issues come from, that there's an organized criminal aspect around transshipping drugs through the Philippines. Now, that has not been what has been necessarily or overtly targeted in the current war on drugs. So I think this goes back to what Dr. Hart was saying, is about it's a war on certain people that is portrayed as something else, that this is being tough on crime. And when you say what are other policies, quite clearly, it's what we say at the LSE is that you've got to focus on the same thing. Like any other development policy, you focus on the Sustainable Development Goals. You focus on the basic principles of improving human health and welfare, improving security, improving governance, improving democratic values, improving the rule of law. None of those things are assisted by a war on drugs. All of those things are actually quite undermined by the idea of a war on drugs. You undermine the basic idea of a rule of law and security and human rights. As someone like Pascal could well highlight, using police responses to deal with drug use undermine the health responses to drug dependence. So instead of the state investing in the kind of services that reduce the harms of drugs and enable people to access treatment services, you're pushing them further away from these social services. You're pushing them to the very fringes of society and making it harder for them to access it. So what is an alternative policy set? De-escalate the militarized police response, scale up the public health service approach to it, and use policing in a far more strategic, far more targeted manner, which frankly a war on drugs just simply is not. That's just a blanket enforcement mechanism.
May I respond also to the question? Yeah. No problem. You asked about options and alternatives. Yeah, there's this publication that was distributed to all the participants, which is from the International Drug Policy Consortium. This is specifically about this region in Asia, where this looks at different models and approaches that have been used in this very region, including diversion, including scaling up harm reduction, including evidence-based drug dependence treatment, essentially none of which are being implemented in the Philippines. This does not imply any way of decriminalization. Decriminalization is yet another option, but before even considering decriminalization, scaling up health responses, implementing evidence-based drug dependence treatment, harm reduction, diversion away from incarceration are all methodologies that have been proven to be effective in addressing drug problems in this very region.
Based on the result of survey conducted by Pulse Asia in the period of March 15 to 20, President Duterte enjoys the highest trust rating among all government officials, meaning 78%, meaning 8 out of 10 Filipinos believe on his capacity being the leader of this country. This means almost 8 of 10 people support of his campaign on drugs. But we think that a big contributor for this is war on drugs because people say that they now feel safer. How would you match the things that you say versus the overwhelming support that the President Filipinos are giving to him? And second, sir, do you have any concrete evidence pointing President Duterte or his government behind on the extrajudicial killings?
We're talking drug policy here. So I don't think our experts would be in any position to discuss whether or not they believe that President is, because they're experts on drug policy. We're not talking JK. So your second question, I don't think our experts can answer your second question. Your first question, however, I think.
No, I mean, I don't understand. You should know my expertise. So I'm here in order to help the Philippine people and people who attend this forum understand what drugs do and what drugs don't do. Oftentimes, our sort of campaigns against drugs start with assumptions that are so flawed and so inappropriate. And then they lead us down paths where we don't want to go, as was nicely described here. So those are my expertise. In terms of how the people feel about their president, it's not my expertise, and nor do I care to comment on that.
Yeah, I think I would echo that. My expertise, my interest in this is not around a politician or necessarily a government. My expertise and interest is around a specific policy response. The fact that it is popular initially, we have seen that multiple times across the globe. The war on drugs, as it was declared in the United States in the 1970s, was very popular repeatedly, right up to the 2000s. And then all of a sudden, public opinion started to turn very heavily against it. Those communities that were actually advocating it earlier on particularly black communities, minority communities in the United States in the 1980s, realized that it was they who were actually being targeted by this policy. So it wasn't actually helping them, and that's where you saw a tidal shift in public opinion. And I think the problem is that takes a long time to be recognized, and that's what we've seen across the globe. But I would just reiterate, this is not about a politician or any particular government. This is about a set of policy choices.
Just briefly, I agree with both my colleagues and what they've said. I also think that there's plenty of evidence from other countries, as I've pointed out, like Thailand, where the same situation happened when Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra launched the war on drugs in 2003. At the time when he launched the war on drugs, he enjoyed over 90% approval ratings, but within a very short time, that approval rating went down very, very low. And even while he enjoyed a 90% approval rating, when polled, more than 60% of citizens were not confident that the war on drugs would be able to achieve its objectives. So even while people are supporting the policy, they're not confident that it's going to produce the results that the politicians have promised. So I think it's important to disaggregate that. It's not just that there's support for the war on drugs, but are people actually confident that things will change in the Philippines? Has that question been asked of the citizens?
The government presented its policy on the war on drugs. Now, what do you think of the policy? How do you assess it in terms of the data presented, the evidence presented? How much is it based on assumptions? How solid are the numbers?
Wow, I wish Dr. Benj was here because I hadn't seen anybody dance like that around questions. But I think the questions that were asked of him highlighted many of the inconsistencies that the audience felt. And in my presentation, I hope some of these things become clear. There were some questions that was asked of him that he just simply didn't have the answer for. And I can't speak for him, and I apologize for that. But I think one of the most striking things, as Dr. Collins has said, about those data, and it was nice that I was thankful that he presented them, was that Filipino drug using rates are generally lower than that of other people, other communities, other nations. And then the people who actually have problems with drugs are really low. And so the question becomes, why do you have this intensified efforts against drugs when you have the data that was presented to us today that doesn't look like a major problem? So what's really going on? I can't answer that question.
Start with that. Just to clarify again, I don't think our mandate here is to evaluate the Filipino drug policy. We're not. Our mandate is really to provide support and advice and some additional evidence for consideration in formulating the national drug policy here. But based on what you were asking is about the evidence, again, my experience from Thailand is that 15 years later, the war on drugs started in 2003. 15 years later, we're still measuring the impact of the war on drugs in Thailand. So it's not something that can be done overnight. You can't generate your data very quickly. It takes a lot of time, and it's especially difficult to collect data about the impact of the war on drugs on people who use drugs if they're not comfortable coming out and being interviewed by scientists or by the media. Yeah, so as long as there's massive repression and the risk to be identified and to be shot, then people are not going to come out to inform scientists who collect the evidence to inform policy making. So there's a major conflict of interest there. The other idea is that those studies in Thailand, the assessment of the impact of the war on drugs has been done mostly through academic studies, scientific randomized studies with controls, and they produce evidence that are peer-reviewed and published in scientific journals. There's also a lot of projects on the ground, civil society groups that have documented abuses, the impact of the war on drugs. So there's a lot of different evidence that's available, but again, having repressive policies in place will limit the kind of evidence that you can collect locally. Thank you.
the war on drugs by the Duterte administration has been running for almost a year. Let's talk about the experience of Bayan for 15 years. What are the irreversible effects of that war on drugs?
That's a very good question. I'd rather invite you to attend the session tomorrow, because tomorrow I'll be presenting the impacts as well as presenting the evidence. I've got materials to fill, 24 hours of talking about the impact. I'm given an hour tomorrow. I've condensed and selected what I think is the most important impacts, but it ranges from negative health impact to also negative impact on law enforcement, as well as negative impact on the general population in many different ways, which again, I will unpack for you tomorrow.
Here in the Philippines, one of our prevalent presumptions is that the drug use is, or the drug scourge is related to the criminality rates. And I think that was also evident in the presentation a while ago by Sir Benji. Would you say that this presumption is well founded in your experience? That there's a relation between drug use and criminality?
Yes, that's always, the question was related to drugs and crime. I mean, clearly, if there is criminal activity, law enforcement has to do their job, clearly. But the vast majority of drug users don't engage in crime. When we think about even the drugs that people take and use, we think about alcohol, for example. There are people who do alcohol, and they may engage in some violence. That certainly is possible. But the vast majority of people who use alcohol do not engage in the violent crimes. But certainly it's possible. But we don't have a war against alcohol. The same can be said for shabu. The same could be said for the opioids or cocaine. So there are criminals who happen to use drugs. And then we also have the criminal activity, as Dr. Collins described, in terms of trafficking. Police have to do their job in terms of trafficking. That doesn't change.
Very short follow-up. Earlier, Dr. Collins, you mentioned that the war on drugs is not really a new idea, and we know that for a fact. So basically, this war on drugs by the president just stopped the as simple as that.
Based on international experience, it has virtually never worked. Even when you've seen impacts, sizable impacts, they're short-lived. So based on international evidence, it is extraordinarily unlikely that this is going to have a positive long-term impact. It would be remarkable based on what we've experienced in other contexts. So that's all I can say about it. I can't say specifically in the Philippines case, this is definitely going to fail. Based on everything we know about everywhere else it's been tried, it just doesn't work.
My question is for the organizers. After this two-day job policy forum, what we're going to do, we're going to collaborate with the government. I understand there are representatives from the government, but are you coming up with a resolution, things to consider, and plan to have a dialogue with the government, with the president, and things like that?
We want this to be the start of a new conversation, and we would want everyone in the country who has an interest in the drug issue, in human rights, in public policy, involved in the conversation. We hope that we can kickstart something new and get people to start thinking about different approaches that go beyond the simple war on drugs. After the two-day conference, we will, of course, assess and come up with some summation of what we've done. But as I said, that will just be the beginning.